You're a business asset. You've got management, you've got teams of people. You know, there's a liability there, even possibly for you, you know, doing something that will damage your career. So everything is against people speaking out. But something happened in 2020, or the end of 2020, when I first started speaking publicly about it. A switch was hit in my brain that look, this is far too big to just pretend it's not happening. It's quite clear to me that since 2020 that the switch has been, you know, flicked. We've been nudged along for some time over the last at least couple of decades, maybe longer. But you can feel the intensity of what's going on. I've had messages of support off many DJs, just saying, I said something once, but I got real backlash. I've had others say, I'll step in when I'm needed to, you know, when things get bad. And I've heard that from quite a few people, and I think, well, it'll be too late. You can guarantee now, by the time you feel comfortable to step in, where you're that desperate that you feel, yeah, we have to do something, it's going to be too late.
Welcome to the Staying Free podcast. If you're new to the show, then welcome. Good to have you as a listener. And if you're an existing subscriber, then welcome back. In this episode, I had a conversation with Stuart Langelaan. Stuart is also known as DJ Lange, and as well as being a famous musician, he's also become somewhat of a hero in the freedom movement. So I talked to Stuart about everything from his career and how it's been affected by both COVID-19 and the restrictions that were put in place, as well as his own advocacy and the nature of being an outspoken advocate for freedom. I have huge respect for people like Stuart who have a lot on the line and still choose to speak out. And I think this is something that a lot of us have felt, which is that with everything going on in the world right now, there's no option to stay silent. And we all have to do our part to try and speak truth and advocate for the world that we want to bring about. I really hope you enjoy the episode. If you do, please give it a share on social media. If you're enjoying the podcast so far, please give it a 5-star review in whichever podcast app you're using. Any donations to the podcast are hugely appreciated. This can be done in 2 ways. The first is by using the tip option in Twitter, where you can give a Bitcoin tip. And the other option is to follow the link in the bio, which will take you to Buy Me a Coffee, where you can give a tip there as well. Huge thanks to Jane Carpenter, who was the first to give me a donation over on Buy Me a Coffee. So massive thank you, Jane, for that. As promised for this episode, special thanks go out to Ryan Raleigh and Beverly Shaw for sharing my tweet and tagging a friend who you think would like the podcast. And also thank you to Spirit of Down Under Flutes for sharing the tweet. Didn't actually tag anyone, but maybe next time you can find someone who you think is going to enjoy the podcast and give them a tag as well. There's only one way to get the word out about alternative media like this podcast, especially when we're being throttled by platforms like Twitter, and that is to directly share it with your friends and family. So if anyone wants to do that, then I'll give you a shout out in future episodes. As mentioned in the last episode, the podcast is now on YouTube. At the moment, it's in catch-up mode, so I'm starting from the beginning with older episodes, but it is taking me a while to get the episodes on there because I have got to censor every single episode to make sure that we don't mention the vaccine. So YouTube is on the way, but I don't recommend that people use YouTube to listen to this podcast, since it will always have to be censored. The only reason I'm using YouTube is to get more of an audience, and also it's good for comments and community engagement. But if you want to see the video version of the podcast and interact with comments, then I recommend checking the description and following the link to censorship-free platforms. All right, that's enough of the intro. Let's get into the episode. So, Stuart, welcome to the podcast. Really good to have you on here. I know that a lot of people follow your tweets and follow kind of what you're talking about on social media and kind of really resonate with what you're saying. And you're a very kind of popular commentator. So I think it'll be really great for my audience to kind of hear your more nuanced opinions. So welcome.
Many thanks, Johnny, for the invite. Appreciate it.
Yeah, so I guess before we kind of really get into it, do you want to just give a little bit of the background as to your journey as a musician and kind of getting to where you are today?
Yeah, sure. I've been in the trance music industry, or electronic dance industry, for around 25 years now. I think I was lucky to be making the right music at the right time, really, around at the end of the 90s. And then I became a DJ as well, about 5 years later. So that's been my life for the last 20, 25 years, has been largely traveling the world, doing gigs and writing music.
Okay, great. So Obviously now you've become very popular as a kind of, I don't really like using the word activist necessarily, but someone who's very outspoken on the side of freedom with everything that's been going on lately. Is that something that has always been kind of a part of your identity, or was this something that kind of kicked off post-COVID? Because I certainly wasn't aware of any of your kind of more political side before that. So I'm just interested to know where that's come in.
It's definitely been amplified with the COVID scenario. I mean, people like, for example, Julian Assange, I've always tried to sort of mention, but the golden rule generally is you don't get political, because your fan base don't want to know about that most of the time. And as far as party politics go, although I was getting a bit, I was doing some commentary on it at the last election. I try and avoid all that. It's not worth talking about. But something happened in 2020, or the end of 2020, when I first started speaking publicly about it. A switch was hit in my brain that look, this is far too big to just pretend it's not happening, and it would have been impossible for me not to say anything, to be honest.
Yeah, that's definitely something that I think a lot of people have felt. Like, I feel like so many people have kind of snapped into gear with everything that's going on, in a sense that, you kind of feel like to some degree you're looking down the barrel of a gun, and it's like, okay, now is not the time to kind of shy away from this issue and not talk about it. Like, I think a lot of people have been jolted into action by everything.
Absolutely, but the power of not wanting to stand out and go against the grain has worked wonderfully as usual, particularly in the trance music scene. I mean, I've spoken to plenty of DJs on, in private about this, and many are on the same page with what's going on. Some aren't, but the amount of people who've spoken out, actually, certainly in my scene, in the trance music scene, it's pretty much been zero, apart from myself.
Yeah, so I do want to get into that, actually, is in terms of kind of how it's affected your career and the nature of kind of what's going on, a kind of insider's take into the music industry and how people are feeling about this. But before we get onto that, I just want to go into a bit of your kind of, I guess, red pill origin story, as it were. The moment where you started to really realize that things weren't right and that we were going in a very dangerous direction, and when you kind of had your moment of realizing that you need to start speaking out about these issues.
Well, for me, I went ahead with the original lockdown. I stayed at home, etc. To be honest, it was nice weather. It was great to have some time off, a forced break in that sense. But I was very aware that there would be people that weren't in the fortunate circumstance I was in, having a back garden, etc., etc. So, but I was already suspicious right from the off. I mean, I wasn't scared of the virus at all right from the beginning. I saw the videos from China, and I just didn't believe it. And of people falling down in the streets, etc. And in fact, I think I went to a concert on the Saturday, John Hopkins concert, just literally before the lockdown came in, and I went there. I wasn't concerned about my safety. But it's when it kept going, and it was almost becoming predictable, as well as to, now they're not going to allow us, Christmas. And sure enough, they didn't allow us Christmas. There was obviously people like Michael Yeadon, who I think we've all got a lot to thank him for. Spoke out, talked about how the science wasn't adding up. That then triggered me to look more into that side of things. I mean, I'm no expert, obviously, just a musician, DJ, but there's a lot of logic as well with what he was saying, and then that made me think about the statistics of who's dying from this. I don't watch mainstream media. I haven't done for some time. I actually got rid of my TV license probably about 6-7 years ago, because I knew I was paying for propaganda, basically, from the BBC. But I did see on Twitter there was a lot of people that were being put on TV that were young in hospital, and I don't know, it just felt a little bit. We're only seeing what they want us to see, So it looked at the stats, saw that the chance of having an issue with this was very low. And there was just so many lies after lie after lie. The change in stance from the official government advisors. Chris Whitty, 1 minute was saying it was mild, the next minute, we're now, panicking as a nation over this, and the masks as well. The fact that people had said prior, no mask use, and then all of a sudden we're like putting masks on in the 30-degree heat in the summer. None of it made sense. And then when the vaccine came, I thought, well, they've lied so much. I just don't believe them. I don't believe I need this. There's no chance I'm trusting with them. This is already looking like a societal change move, a psychological attack, if you like, on the masses. So I didn't take the vaccine.
Yeah. I think that's that story that you've just kind of essentially given there is so similar to, I think, how so many of us came to it. I mean, I was the same, like right at the beginning when the first lockdown kicked in. I actually didn't really have much of an opinion either way. Before that point, I'd been super terrified of COVID. Not terrified necessarily just for myself, but I thought this was going to be a really, really big world event, like before even the media was massively into it. And then as it kind of approached close to the time, I started thinking, okay, maybe it's not so bad, maybe it's not so bad. And just when I was at the point of thinking, okay, we probably don't have to worry about this, then all of a sudden the media switched it on and said, okay, now we've got to go into lockdowns and all the rest of it. But yeah, like during that time, obviously, I think all of us had a little bit of time to think and to kind of reflect, and started looking at statistics. And, really, I think, like you said, Michael Yeadon was, a huge kind of advocate for reason when it came to this stuff. And I think in the beginning, even he, wasn't necessarily saying, okay, well, there's some, terrible things going on, and there's a plan, and it's a whole great reset and everything. Obviously, he is now kind of in that camp since that point. But back then, I think a lot of us were just looking at the data and we're saying, okay, maybe we've kind of exaggerated. And then it just kept getting more and more crazy. I think for me, the point where I really was like, okay, this is just not about science, this is not about health, is when masks were introduced, like weeks after the lockdown. Like we'd already opened up, and all of a sudden it was, now we've got to wear masks. And I think that point for me, it became so obvious that this was a psyop. They needed something to keep everyone afraid, because your kind of experience of the world was so different to what the media was presenting. Eventually, you have to reconcile the fact that you're not seeing people die on the street. You're not seeing, most people didn't know anyone who had even at that point got COVID, let alone been hospitalized or died. Like it was, your visceral experience was so different. So yeah, I mean, I think that story there is just so common. I think a lot of people who might otherwise have never been a kind of conspiracy theorist or any kind of a skeptic, it's really hard when all of these facts are just coming at you day by day to not. You have to really turn a blind eye if you are in any way a critical thinker.
Absolutely. I totally agree. I mean, I was skeptical. I was aware that politics is largely a theatre, and I mean, from UK politics, people say, we have a chance to vote, but when you think about it, and I've said this before on Twitter, we've really had, if you accept that Blair was working for the corporates as well, we've had nothing but a Tory style working for the corporates government since the 70s. So I've always been skeptical. I mean, seeing a lot of the work that was done to demonize Corbyn, for example. Now, I know I'm aware that he's a character that some people, he's a Marmite character for many, but for me, I think he was sincere, and I supported him. And the strange thing is, a lot of what he was actually advocating is largely where I think we're actually heading with this idea of universal basic income, the idea of doing things from a more sort of caring state, because we are going to face a lot of issues with AI, robots. unemployment. We're in for a big shake-up. But the difference is that at least with Corbyn, you felt that it was a genuine from the workers' side of an argument, whereas we all know that we're the lowest priority when it comes to what the Tories and most governments. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah. I mean, the whole Jeremy Corbyn thing is a weird one, because everything that he was kind of advocating, because I agree with you, the establishment hated him. They still hate him to this day. They did not want Corbyn to be shadow PM or whatever it is, let alone PM, right? So I think that what it demonstrates, because actually what we see now is that all of what Corbyn wanted is very much at the front and center of the agenda, zero carbon and UBI and all this kind of stuff. This was what Jeremy Corbyn was about. He was like extremely far left. And now all of these things are kind of back on the table. All you've got is different people who are kind of administrating it. So it seemed to me like he was the right man with the wrong ideas, in my view. I there was a point where I actually liked Jeremy Corbyn, but I used to be a lefty. I used to be like quite far left, actually, compared to where I am now. But you're right. Like he always had and still has an authenticity about him and a realness, and you can just tell that someone like that, they're not really made for politics. However, his ideas. A lot of them are very, very much in line with, what the WEF and all of these kind of organizations actually want now. So, he probably wasn't too far off the mark in that sense.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I consider myself quite far left, literally until 2020. And the way I've seen the left go along with all this, it's like no one's asking questions. But for me, yeah, I agree. Certainly now, in hindsight, I'd be much against what a lot of Corbyn was advocating, because in an ideal world, a lot of the solutions are fair, but we don't live in an ideal world, and power always ends up grabbing the reins at the top, and that kind of centralisation is just destined to be misused, and that's what we face now is everything moving to centralization, as you know, but not just your sort of standard things in life, but it is literally, you can see there's a move now for every aspect of our lives to be centrally controlled. I mean, we're seeing a move on food and farmers. It's quite interesting how that's been developing over the last few weeks. The idea, I can only assume, is to sort of crush the small business, the small farmers, and we will have a food shortage potentially at some point. And then the solution is, well, you get our food. We deliver the food to you, we deliver the energy to you, we deliver through UBI the money, and everything is very much digitally monitored. So you end up with a situation where, if you don't obey your government, you don't eat. Simple as that. You don't have access to money, and that's incredibly dangerous. But the question I always think is, what's the alternative? Bearing in mind we're moving into this AI, robotics, a huge unemployment is going to come at some point. How do we deal with that issue and the fact that it is logical to make a lot of things, digitally operated? It's this logical way forward. So how do you put the brakes on what seems to be the obvious thing to do?
Yeah. Well, I mean,
I hope you've got the answer, Johnny.
Well, let me try and flesh out an answer here, and let's see what you think. So, I totally agree with you in terms of the what everything that they're trying to do with for instance, the food shortages and everything, and the UBI. Like the thing is, the UBI is its strength comes from our kind of dependence on it. And once people are hungry, especially, that is really where you kind of corner people, because if people are hungry, you don't need to even have the government go and deliver the food and take on all of these tasks, which I actually don't believe that they will do that. I think that what's going to happen is that once you have these food shortages, you essentially come into some kind of rationing situation, get everyone on board with the idea of rationing, and then the UBI can be used as a kind of way to allow you to get more or less. So it's like, okay, we're rationing food, but if you want a little bit more, you can do this, that, and the other thing. You get your vaccine, you do this, you do that, and then you can get a bit more food. If you don't get the vaccine, you're gonna get less UBI, and you're gonna go hungry. I mean, obviously that's probably a pretty dystopian view, but I think that on a long enough time frame, that is the inevitable conclusion of a UBI system. Now, in terms of kind of what is the alternative system, like this is why I'm a huge advocate for Bitcoin, because I believe that if we put our economic energy into Bitcoin and we have a parallel economy which is completely uncensorable, and we are able to kind of retain our ability to spend and trade and all the rest of it in a digital way. Obviously, some people say, oh, well, we should use gold and we can use silver. But realistically, I just don't think that's ever going to be used as a currency again, because it's incredibly difficult. People don't have the tools, the will, the desire, the education to start, chipping away at coins to make certain quantities which have a certain value in trading them. I think realistically, in the digital world, we're going to need a digital solution, and that for me is Bitcoin. So I see Bitcoin as being this parallel economy. I mean, it's not happy to go into it, but like there are definitely conversation where I've taught fully about this. But that would be my solution as at least an alternative, because you're right. I think that we're going to be backed into this corner with these UBI systems, and we need to have an alternative. It's no good just fighting what's coming. We actually need to say, okay, well, what's our alternative vision? What's our alternative kind of tools? And I think Bitcoin is it personally.
Well, I do agree with you in some respects about that. And yeah, we won't go into it if you've covered it a lot, and I've got nothing much to offer regarding Bitcoin anyway, but
we can riff on it for a bit. It's an interesting avenue, so why not?
Okay. Yeah. Well, I know you're a big fan. So it's, for me, it's a great idea, but they can still destroy it if they want. And that's the issue, I think. Partly maybe because they have the Bitcoin futures. It's tied to a traditional style market, which gives them power to pull it down in value. And of course, all the usual market tricks, which it is happening now with Bitcoin. Obviously, they ramp it to a point, and then they get short, and of course pull it down. And now we're getting all the media stories about Bitcoin's so risky, this, that, and the other. And it's the same cycle. So they're doing the same cycle with Bitcoin. I think it's a great idea, but I think regulations as well, they could potentially crush it. Because that's a big problem we've got just overall with all of this, is if you protest, if you try and cause chaos, which is what they want anyway, the ultimate issue we have is legitimacy of holding these people to account. And when the legal system is, aligned with what they're trying to achieve largely, you end up with that impossible position. And I feel that with Bitcoin. Now, I hope that I'm wrong, but I do feel there's a risk that they will be able to pull it down. But of course, they're quite happy to say how good it is at the moment, because they want us to think that the central bank digital currencies that are coming are the same as Bitcoin. I think Matt Hancock's been talking about this recently. And, they want you to think it's a good thing, because obviously a lot of people love Bitcoin. So it's a good thing to brush that excitement over and get people, this is this new currency from the central bank. And that's the big risk, is CBDCs. They're going to come. I don't think we can stop a lot of this. One interesting point from Majid, from ex-LBC, one thing he said is that it's the key thing for us to do, because this is all likely to be pushed forward, is to have a ramp off. And Bitcoin, of course, he was saying, was the ramp off, potentially. But I think there are other things we need to do as well, with regards to trying to connect better locally, with people in a local area, pick suppliers, so that if the shit hits the fan, we can work together locally to bypass the centralized system, if you like.
Yeah.
I went on a bit of a tangent there, I suppose.
But... No, that's absolutely fine. I totally agree with your second point in terms of kind of Bitcoin's ability to weather this storm. I think that really they don't have the tool, the ability to bring it down, because the only way that they can really do it, obviously you're right, they can kind of mess around with the futures market, they can manipulate price to a degree. However, you can always just decline to sell, and this is kind of the importance of having conviction in this thing, is that even if they tank the price, there are people, and in the Bitcoin community we call them hodlers of last resort, people who they are not going to sell at any price. You could send it to a penny and you're not going to sell, because you're on the ship, and you either sink with the ship, or it goes to the moon and it wins. Like, those are the two options. And I think that once people adopt that mentality, those tools, those kind of, I guess, fiat tools of trying to manipulate price, etc., they can only have so much of an impact. Because if people just say, well, I'm not going to sell, like, I believe in it, I don't care how much the price fluctuates, because the futures eventually have to be settled, and they have to be settled by the underlying asset being traded. Like, that's how those futures contracts ultimately realize their value as a contract, is that the real value price of Bitcoin has to kind of trade in a way that is in a way that makes profit for these contracts. If the Bitcoin price doesn't do what they want, because they've got all these futures saying it's going to go to zero or whatever, and people just don't sell, well, you've just wrecked all of these people who've got the futures contracts. And, that's kind of like taking out this front line of people who are fighting against it. So I think that their tools are limited. And, moving on kind of to your second point as well about, like, the courts and stuff. This is another reason why I really like Bitcoin, because it's kind of like we're running our consensus rules. If we really want to get away from these institutions, and we're saying, okay, let's the courts are corrupt, and the establishment is corrupt, but we can actually like run a set of rules, like the consensus rules of the Bitcoin network, and we can say, at the very least, obviously it has limited scope, but at the very least, we're protecting our property rights. It's just kind of the encryption of our property in a way which cannot be taken from us. It's like nobody can they can make a law tomorrow and say, hey, sorry, you can't collect water anymore. Oh, sorry, you can't grow your own food, or whatever it is. They could make that law tomorrow and enforce it. And we wouldn't be able to do that much about it. But if they make a law tomorrow and say, we're taking all your Bitcoin, you either hand it over voluntarily, or they're going to have to find a way to essentially break SHA-256 encryption, which is not going to happen. It's mathematically backed up, essentially. So this is why I think that it shouldn't be overlooked as a tool. But you're right, it shouldn't be used as the only tool. I definitely agree that, like, becoming more local and doing things on a more localized level, whether that's growing food and trading it with people, whether it's getting involved with your local, farmer or whatever, and, securing resources that way. Helping each other out is ultimately key. And I think that one isn't necessarily at the cost or expense of the other. Like, both things can happen simultaneously.
Yeah, I agree. Bitcoin would be perfect. It is a perfect solution, although there are issues, I believe, over using it, on a daily basis at scale. But there are other cryptocurrencies that are potentially, better and more efficient. Since then.
Well, there's something called the Lightning Network, which is worth looking into, and it's essentially a way of kind of trading. It's a way of trading Bitcoin, which is kind of off. It's called off-chain, so you're not using the main Bitcoin chain and kind of congesting the network and having high fees. So you can kind of do that at very, very low cost, like fractions of a cent to do transactions, and then eventually it will settle to the main chain. But it's actually cryptographically assured. It's not like with gold and cash where you hand around the cash, but someone's keeping the gold and saying, okay, well, we may or may not redeem it for cash. With Lightning Network, you're actually trading essentially kind of pre-signed transactions, which are cryptographically assured. So, it's incredibly cheap, but it eventually settles to the main chain in a different way. So it's kind of a layered system. It's worth looking into that because a lot of people don't know this system exists, and it is a very good solution. So all these things are being thought out in the Bitcoin community. I mean, obviously, I'm a bit of an evangelist, but there are a lot of great technical solutions coming out.
Oh, great! So what do? They effectively say, okay, we're taking this 1,000 Bitcoins out, and then they then are almost like a broker, if you like, to make smaller payments separately from the system.
Well, it uses
like a subsystem.
It's something called payment channels. So it's, I guess, a way to think about it. Have you ever used an app called Splitwise by any chance?
No.
No. So it's basically an app whereby you kind of log, maybe you're going on holiday or whatever, and you kind of, rather than every single time someone pays for something, you say, okay, well, let's all get our money out and, agree how much everyone owes. You kind of put it down in the app, and the app will kind of log how much everyone owes, and it will kind of constantly rebalance. So, you might go out and buy a meal, and then someone else goes and buys drinks, and it will kind of rebalance what everyone owes proportionately. And then you only settle periodically. So maybe after the week holiday or whatever, you say, okay, now we'll settle. And what it actually even does is simplifies all of that, so that it'll only be one, rather than everyone sending everyone money, it will say, okay, well, actually, in the end, it's only, Steve owes Joe money, because everything is kind of included. It kind of simplifies all of it. The Lightning Network kind of works in a similar way. So essentially, it takes what you have is like, I have, let's say, a Bitcoin, and you have a Bitcoin. And rather than every time I want to send you 0.1 Bitcoin, rather than settling it to the main network, what we do is, we agree between us that I've given you 0.1, and then maybe you want to give me some Bitcoin later down the line, and you give me 0.5, and then it kind of rebalances. And eventually what you do is you say, okay, how much is each of our final balance? And you then settle that to the main network. But it doesn't necessarily only have to be two people. So you can actually have any number of additional people within this. So you might have, you can have 2 people, you might have 5, you might be able to kind of link it up with your local bar. So maybe they've got a Lightning channel that you can tap into, and everyone is kind of sharing from this kind of liquidity pool, and only periodically do you actually settle to the main chain. So it takes a lot of those high fee transactions off the main chain. So this is actually something that solves already for a lot of the problems that the kind of altcoins are trying to solve. Is that, it kind of has already been solved on the Bitcoin network. But it's definitely worth looking into. It's really, really cool technology, really fun to play with. Yeah.
No, sounds interesting.
Anyway, so we kind of went down a bit of a rabbit hole there, but just zooming back out a little bit, what's actually going on, Stuart? Like, give us the picture as you see it, because I know that a lot of people have different ideas of where they think this is going and what's happening in the world, and I'm interested to know your thoughts and kind of where you are down this rabbit hole.
Okay, it's always a big question. I'll probably meander somewhat trying to answer it, but for me, it seems to be all about the financial system, and certainly that's why I think it's happening now. All the countries in the world, certainly the Western world, are heavily in debt, some over 100% of the GDP. So there's just no room left to keep running this system. Because inflation is now happening, and normally interest rates would go up as a way. I mean, I'm simplifying it, but interest rates would go up to reduce people being so flamboyant and spending money, and because they can't borrow cheaper money. And we're in a position now where the interest rates can't go up in response. Otherwise, there'll just be this collapse with people not being able to pay their loans. So I think the timing is key on this. I think there's always been this agenda that at this point of time, because capitalism is also struggling due to the fact that AI and robotics are threatening such a large, amount of people in work. So we've got unemployment potentially a factor. Capitalism won't allow for people to be chosen over efficiency. That's just not how it works. It's a natural force. It does its own thing to either increase profits or look for efficiency. Well, to increase profits both ways. So it's growth or efficiency, and you can't do that when you're still trying to keep people doing jobs that a robot could do or AI can do. So this will lead to mass unemployment. And I think we're at a stage where, and they've planned this for a long time, they've known this day is coming, and they've made so much money. And I say they, I'm talking about the elites, the billionaires, many of which we don't know about. So we're at a breaking point with the fiat system. This is why I think COVID happened. This is why I think we're now well onto this net zero plan. I'm not against doing things for the environment, absolutely not. And I'm not a denier that we are effectively poisoning our planet and destroying the ecology. Climate change, I try and avoid the climate change thing because I honestly haven't looked into it enough to know our extent of changing it. But for me, that isn't the point. You look at what's happening in the seas. We've stripped them, and we're aware that we're poisoning even ourselves with minute particles of plastic that get in the water system, and they say they found them in human body now. So we can't go on like this. And the amount we will get through resources, the waste is absurd. So we need a great reset. We need a transformation of the way we live. But you look at organisations that I believe are, and most of us, I think, on this side of the story, believe that it's the World Economic Forum that's sort of the hub of this, bringing in all the big corporates together and the world leaders. They've been around since 1970 something. The quest being to make the world a better place, effectively, to look for solutions. Well, only now just happens the financial system's collapsing, and we're at this great, as they call it, as Klaus Schwab from the WEF calls it, the fourth industrial revolution, i.e. the one of AI, robotics, and definitely moving into a transhumanism phase, the early stages of that. It's quite clear that those factors are why they're now switching on to needing to do something about the environment. And don't forget, these people are the people that have been effectively pushing us towards the cliff edge of, over consumerism for so long, for decades. So I think that they had the idea that they want to protect their assets. So I should start again almost.
Well, let me help fill in the gap there, because you touched on a point which I think is really important, which ties it together. By the way, this is really, really difficult to get to the bottom of, and I've had now two conversations with a guy called Dan Tubb. Do you know him? He's called King Bingo on Twitter, but he's I don't know if you know him, but
no, I don't know him. No.
He's I've had two conversations with him where I've been trying to drill down on this point, and we still haven't got to the bottom of it yet. It really is, the rabbit hole kind of keeps expanding out in front of you. But I think you touched on something really important there, which is that essentially with the situation of interest rates being at zero, obviously now they've ratcheted up very, very slightly. But if those interest rates go up, you're right, you have a problem of you're going to crash market. We're already seeing that it crashes the stock market. It will also crash the property market as well, because everything at the moment is reliant upon this cheap debt. So there's kind of two options. One is that you put everyone in an insurmountable amount of debt, whereby their property, they're sitting on negative equity and all this kind of stuff, and everyone, you have a huge homelessness problem, people can't afford to eat, etc., and you have a massive societal collapse that way. The second option is that you keep money, you keep interest rates at zero, or you just continuously print money anyway, so that you ensure that the supply of money is outpacing the supply of goods and services, in which case people kind of feel rich. They still got to keep working their ass off, etc. But at least they've got money in their pocket. At least they're not out on the street. They just have to work until they die, basically. But I think that what they're trying to do now is invent this third option, which is the kind of redefinition of property rights altogether, whereby you say, okay, well, actually what we'll have is we'll transfer you all onto this new system, but actually you don't own anything. So you won't own anything. You're not going to own your house. You're not going to own any of your appliances. You're not going to own your car, whatever it is. everything's going to be kind of rented. You're going to be, essentially a kind of serf class. Everything will be rented. But that's a way to kind of keep the system from collapsing. So people can still have their stuff, but the debt can still be kind of somewhat paid off, essentially in the form of perpetual renting of property. So it's kind of like a redefinition of property rights. It's like a third way, kind of like almost like literally an e-communism, like a communism combined with, high-tech solutions, and I put that in kind of inverted commas there, to ensure that kind of people can still have their stuff, they can still feed themselves, etc., but everything's rented, and even the money in there, but their bank account isn't really theirs because it's, subject to all of these stipulations to try to steer everything where it needs to go, and to try to, everyone will ultimately be a slave, but at least the rich stay rich, and at least you don't have a massive societal collapse where, billionaires are having their heads chopped off on the street.
Yeah, that's how that defines it very well. I've got the same opinion with where it's going. The question is, how much force are they going to use? I personally, I'm skeptical. I do think we're going to see interest rates going up. I do think there's going to be a house price crash at some point, as a way to make that happen, to make people hand over their property, say, well, I can't afford the mortgage anymore, and the banks obviously will go, well, you're in negative equity now, so we'll take we'll take the house off you, and we'll let you live in it, and you can rent it from us. So I do see that being forcibly done. I mean, let's face it, people aren't going to accept it any other way, are they? They're not just going to hand their house over. So.
Yeah.
So it's going to be a messy time. I mean, with regards to inflation, do you believe? It seems to be a very carefully managed thing. Inflation, doesn't it? We're being told it's due to energy prices, due to the Ukraine conflict, but I think it's pretty obvious it was COVID that's caused the inflation with all the money printing.
Totally. Yeah. I think that's it. And, the interesting thing about inflation is it can be defined in multiple ways. Some people will say that, and this is incorrect. Most of the people who say this are actually kind of like more on the Keynesian economic side. They'll say, oh, well, inflation is the cost of goods and services going up, which isn't actually what it is. Inflation really is just an increase in the money supply without a proportionate increase in the goods and services in society. Now, the reason that normally causes prices to go up, but not necessarily. So, for instance, most things are going up in price in the world, but you could say, oh, well, things like a television has come down massively in price. And the reason for that is that without that increase in the money supply, it would have come down even more. So things can still come down in price because of various reasons, whether that's technological, whether it's, cultural, whatever reason, things can come down in price. That doesn't mean that inflation isn't still having an impact. So just because my TV might cost me 50% less now than it did 10 years ago, that doesn't mean that inflation isn't happening. What it means is that there's been lots of innovation in the technology space, which means that they're able to make TVs cheaper, etc. Higher demand might play a part, etc. But there's still inflation because without the money printing, that might have come down 75%, right? So yeah, I think that ultimately it has to be down to the money. Yeah.
Yeah, and that's the crux of it, that we are being literally set up with this trap, an economic collapse, and of course the narrative is there to justify why it's happening. But as far as I'm concerned, it was always planned. It seems like it was planned to do this in a way that people will walk into their own trap. And we'll cheer on those. I mean, I don't know what your views are on Ukraine, and perhaps we shouldn't even go into that. But I'm very clear on COVID being an intentional. As far as I was concerned, it was intentional. It was planned, and it was to do what exactly it did, which was mask the financial system, make it worse. And I also think it was probably a big money steal. How do you get everybody involved that needs a sweetener? it was another way to make money, to crash businesses at the same time, small businesses, to get people conditioned to their government and giving them more sort of daily orders, if you like, to split people and divide people with fear. It's just no way at this time. It just fits perfectly with what we think. And Ukraine, again, the reason for the push on media is that people are happily cheering on the money that's going across, allegedly to defend the Western world against Putin. But of course that in itself is crashing the economy for us, with the it's us who's put the what's the word I'm looking for, it's us that said no, we're not using Russian energy, etc., so we've done it to ourselves effectively.
Right.
And it justified the energy price rises, and
True. Yeah, it's at the moment with everything that's going on, I'm almost just like, if you just wanted to bankrupt a country, bankrupt everyone as quickly as possible, you'd basically do everything the government's done in the past couple of years. It just seems like there's absolutely no brakes on this thing when it comes to people kind of being thrust into poverty, and at the moment it's not really realized poverty because everything's kind of like masked under this debt. But at the moment it's almost like, and perhaps this is because they know that the fiat system is going to collapse, so they're like, well, we might as well just run up as much debt as possible now because this whole system is going to come to a collapse anyway. So what's the point in caring about debt? I mean, you don't really even hear. It used to be that Labour would talk about bringing down the debt a little bit, and Conservatives would talk about bringing down the debt a bit more. And now it's just not even on the agenda. I mean, no one ever talks about debt really in any country. I mean, it's the same in America. I think I don't really see that the Republicans and Democrats talk that much about it. Everyone's talking about totally unrelated issues. But yeah, it's like, if you just want everyone to be completely bankrupt, would you do that much different to what governments have done over the past couple of years? I mean, or even just widen the wealth gap, shut all the small businesses, but let all of the big corporations continue as normal, shut all of the businesses which are face to face, but keep ones that can use Zoom and are using all this technology, keep them going, get everyone buying off Amazon, whatever it is, wherever you look, everything seems to be done in the service of keeping people in more and more debt. And I think this is, coming back to what we were saying about the kind of agenda, and especially to do with property rights, it's like they're preparing us to accept we're going to own nothing, we're going to be completely poor. They're kind of preparing us for that eventuality, like drip by drip. They're saying, okay, you're not going to own anything, you're going to be happy, don't worry, you're going to rent this, you're going to be eating bugs. It's like let's just get everyone on board with it, and then in the background we can create the conditions to bring that about. Because I think ultimately, if it happens slowly, people might adapt to it. People might actually adapt, and I think we should be adapting anyway, and becoming more self-sovereign and trying to break away from these entrenched systems and these centralized systems, etc. But I think that their view is like, this has to happen fast so that we can actually catch everyone in the trap. You don't want the trap door to be falling too slowly, that people find a way to actually navigate around it, because they have this vision and they seem pretty hell-bent on achieving it.
Yeah, I mean, it's quite clear to me that since 2020 that the switch has been, flicked, and this is almost the last leg. I think it's probably been, we've been nudged along for some time over the last at least couple of decades, maybe longer, but you can feel the intensity of what's going on. It's just one thing after another. I mean, the amount of potential pandemics, talk of monkeypox, Marburg, all these other ones, the moment there's anything at all, it's being used in the media. And so, I see this. I think they're on the home straight almost. I mean, I think it's going to be very quick. I don't think we're going to get any break from this, and that's the point. They don't allow people to stop and think. which I find strange now, actually, particularly in the UK. I still speak to a few people who still do not believe that there's anything organised going on. Admittedly, they're rarer now than they were, but I don't know how people can still think that way when there's so much, at least coincidental, going on now. It's just one thing after another. Is it just me? Perhaps because I've been watching it more intensely. I mean, perhaps yourself have been watching all of this happen so quickly, and we've been watching it very, very closely. That we feel it more intense than perhaps somebody who's so busy doing an 80-hour working week somewhere that they haven't got time to think about it.
Yeah, possibly. I guess this comes down to that question of what is that defining factor that causes people to become awake? Because this is something I've been trying to answer for a while, and really I think it comes down to two things that I think, one is that you don't watch mainstream media. You actually kind of come to your conclusions based upon your own actual experience of the world. So, for instance, with the COVID stuff, the people who were glued to the TV watching BBC News all the time, they believed we were in the middle of the greatest pandemic for, a century or whatever. And I wasn't watching that. I was just kind of, obviously I was on Twitter and things like that, but in my actual real life, in my day-to-day life, I didn't know anyone who had COVID probably for about 6 months, and until the first person had it. I didn't know anyone who had been hospitalized or died or anything like that. So I think one is how much you take mainstream media to be your reality versus your actual day-to-day experience. And I think the other is just being a contrarian. I've always been a contrarian in my life, and I find that a lot of people in this community are. Actually, that's an interesting thing that I'd like to know about you is were you a contrarian? Because this is something else that seems to be a commonality, is that you don't necessarily just go along to kind of be in the majority or whatever. You tend to, quite often you have an opinion which is different from the majority on subjects. So is that the case for you as well?
Yeah, definitely. When I was a kid, everybody else supported Man United and Liverpool, so I went Everton.
There you go.
Just very awkward. But I've always questioned things. I've always had an inquisitive mind, I believe. So some people will just take everything on face value, but yeah, I'm very skeptical on a lot of issues.
So you mentioned before about other musicians and things, and that many of them were kind of believed the same things that we believed, and were kind of very skeptical as well, but weren't speaking out. Can you just give us a bit of a kind of breakdown as to how you see things in the music industry? Because I think that this is an industry which has obviously been massively impacted. There are musicians who, for some of them, the peak of your career might only last 2 years, and many of them have lost that opportunity to experience it because of lockdowns and things like that. So, what's the kind of general sentiment in the music industry? How has it been affected, and also what are people's responses within that community?
Well, the music industry is a very wide range of circumstances. It's very much pyramid scheme, like everywhere. Sorry, a pyramid, sort of set up like everywhere else. The bigger artists earn a lot more than the smaller artists, and so there's already a lot of people that would have found 14 months impossible to survive without those events. So it's been absolutely devastating to many. The other issue, though, is that a lot of people I've spoken to didn't want to get vaccinated, but have taken the choice to get vaccinated. Because the problem is as well that it's an international job. So, and America being a key market, you need to be vaccinated to go to America, Canada, Australia, New Zealand. Well, not so much New Zealand as a major market, but these are the places that people play a lot. So it's meant that people have had to make difficult choices. and also those earlier on in their career, or their career is just taking off. The last thing they want to do is just put a pause on it now, as you say. So they've been forced to do it. There's been pressure, I know, from managers. Just get it, it'll be fine, And so we've got this horrible situation where I know so many people who have done it against their will.
This section of the conversation has been censored in order to meet the community guidelines. For the full uncensored version of this conversation, please check the description for links to censorship-free platforms. Yeah, I mean, I think that's actually happening quite a lot. I'm hearing quite a few stories of that kind. So yeah, it's incredibly sad. But so I mean, the answer to this is probably fairly obvious, but I'm assuming that the reason that most musicians aren't speaking out is simply because it's going to damage their career, right?
Yeah, like I say, it's always been the unwritten rule that you don't get involved in politics online. I mean, for me, I was reluctant to saying something for quite a while. I think I started speaking out on Twitter I think it was either December or January, so it's January 2021. I was concerned because people come to music to get away from everything. So the last thing you want to do is give them the most depressing feed possible. And that's one reason as well, which I only do it on Twitter. I occasionally mention something on Facebook, but I've just used Twitter to speak out on. So if people really don't want to hear it or are aware about it and just don't want to, have it drummed in every day, just follow me on Facebook. But yeah, I've had messages of support off many DJs just saying, I said something once, but I got real backlash. So I'm just going to see how it goes. I've had others say, I'll step in when I'm needed to, when things get bad. And I've heard that from quite a few people. And I think, well, it'll be too late. You can guarantee now by the time you feel comfortable to step in, where you're that desperate that you feel, we have to do something, it's going to be too late. It's because the legislation is going to change. The laws are going to change. We're seeing this a lot in the UK. With the policing bill, the online safety, and the overhaul of the Human Rights Act. These are all big threats to us being able to take action. I think the UK has actually been quite a strong place to put up a defence against a lot of this because of our in-depth legal system. And whereas other countries like Italy, etc., had such intense mandates and people can't work unless they're vaccinated, illegal to work if you're not vaccinated, others putting ridiculous fines in for not being vaccinated. We've managed to avoid that, partly because of the legal stuff, but also as well because I think we've probably, especially England, been very, very vocal against this.
Yeah, I totally agree. And like you said, that is the time to actually fight as well, because the laws can change very, very quickly. And if they suddenly decide, okay, we're going to bring in new legislation that means you have to have a vaccine to work, etc. Well, then then the clock is really ticking, because then you can't work. And now you're having to put all of your advocacy or your activism into a time frame during which you're not able to earn a living or whatever. So the time to actually fight is long before it happens, because then you've got a much longer kind of runway to actually try to change the trajectory of the way that the world is going. So yeah, I totally agree. So yeah, massive props to you for kind of standing up and actually being counted, because there's so few people out there. There's so few kind of celebrities and people in general, but especially in the music industry, I think has been on the whole quite disappointing. But you've definitely kind of bucked that trend, and massive props for that.
Thank you. Well, people like Russell Brand have been amazing particularly in the recent year or so. He's so on point, and but there's very few people any more famous than that, or even around that fame level, who will speak out. You can understand to a degree why as well. You're a business asset. You've got management. You've got teams of people. There's a liability there, even possibly for you, doing something that will damage your career. and cause a problem. So everything is against people speaking out, as on top of the natural psychological want to not cause a problem.
Yeah, definitely. All right, so just before we wrap up, I know that you've got a song which you made, which I assume was kind of off the back of like the freedom protests and stuff, called Together. Do you mind just kind of giving us a bit of a backstory about that one?
Yeah, I was in the mood for doing something that sounded a bit like my the late 90s stuff. So I thought I'd make a track, try and keep it sort of optimistic sounding and, full of hope. That was the vibe I was going for. And it was around the time of the Canadian trucker protest. And I really felt I wanted to do something to mark that, if you like. And so it samples Chris Sky, who I'm sure you're aware of, who has been an absolute star from the beginning of all this, trying to raise awareness. And so I sampled a clip from one of his rallies. And so I mean, I don't know about you, but I watched the trucker action very closely. Certainly for a week, I was actually watching online as well on YouTube, the live streaming from the front line, if you like. And it's quite incredible. And I think, if anything, this shone such a bright light on the absolute lies of the media, and indeed people like Trudeau are willing to accuse these people of being aggressive, racists, and all this kind of thing, which is absolute nonsense. You could see it with your own eyes. That it was incredibly peaceful. I was amazed how peaceful it was. There's normally somebody causing a problem, but it was so peaceful and a real great movement, and gives us all hope. And I think we're seeing a resurgence, if you like, of that, or continuation of that, with the farmers now across Holland and Germany and other places. The only issue we have with this kind of movement, though, is that if the plan is chaos and they're causing chaos, it's kind of a difficult thing to stand up against, isn't it, really?
Yeah. And this is why I think it ultimately comes back to building a system which is alternative to their vision. I think that all of these things are important, and I agree with you on the Canadian truckers protest. I thought it was absolutely brilliant, and there was just something so emotional about it. It was like you tear up watching just how amazing it is. People flying flags on bridges and stuff. There were some really great videos made of that whole movement, and and like you said, in the end, it was unfortunate how it ended, because it was quashed essentially. It was quashed under Trudeau's jackboot. But it did seem to kind of ignite something across the world. Like you said, we've now got the kind of farmers' protest going on, and I'm not sure whether that necessarily would have happened if we hadn't have had the Canadian protests. It seems like that they gave the world a bit of an idea in that respect. So,
absolutely. That's a very key point about this. It's confidence. You stand up, you help others have the confidence to do the same, and that's what this whole movement is about. Is just like making people realize you can stand up, and you're not alone. That's the key thing. You're not alone. If we stick together, we can really push back on this. At least move it a bit more in our benefit. If it's happening, it's happening. But let's try and control how this works out.
Totally agree. Let's end on that note. Do you want to just let everyone know where they can find you before we wrap this up?
Yeah, sure. You can get me on my website, djlange.com, and I'm on Twitter as DJ Lange as well. And Facebook, my page is Lange Fan. And see you around.
Thanks so much.